You already know the numbers. The house was $7,000. Gas was 29 cents a gallon, one income, one car, one bathroom, and somehow it all worked. But here's what the numbers don't tell you. They don't tell you what it felt like to hand your neighbor your house key before a trip, knowing it would still be there when you got back. They don't tell you what a man's toolbox meant to him. The weight of it, the grease in the handle. Let's see how many of these memories you remember living. Or if you didn't live through it, come feel what it felt like to actually be there. I'm not here to tell you that it was some kind of better era, though many hold on to the memories like it was. It's really that the 1950s were nothing like today. And as you watch this, you'll understand why. This episode is about the machinery underneath the memory, how the economy actually ran, what the schools taught, what the doctors prescribed, what the government was doing that nobody talked about, how a country that had just survived a world war rebuilt itself into something that, for one specific window of time, genuinely worked, and why that window closed. Some of it will feel like home. Some of it will surprise you. Not all of it is easy to look at. Some of what held that world together sat just below the surface of everything else. We're going to get there, too. Let's start with what a man kept in his garage. A man's toolbox was a badge of honor. Heavy steel, no labels, just years of grease and know-how. You didn't throw things out. You fixed them. Radios got new tubes. Shoes got new soles. Toasters got rewired. There was pride in keeping things running, not because you were cheap, but because you could. And when something finally broke for good, you mourned it. And if your neighbor's mower broke, you didn't call someone. You walked over and helped. Polio was still a real fear in the early 1950s. Kids were told not to swim in public pools during outbreaks. Then, in '55, Jonas Salk's vaccine came out, and it was like the whole country let out a breath it had been holding for years. If your family had a station wagon, you were living good. You piled in the back without seatbelts, windows down, dog drooling in the wind, Dad shouting over the radio, and Mom passing sandwiches back from a cooler. It wasn't fancy, but it was freedom. The neighborhood barbershop was where stories were told, hair was cut, and secrets were half whispered under the buzz of clippers. You didn't need Yelp. You needed Lou, the guy who'd been cutting your hair since Eisenhower got elected and still charged $2. There was no GPS. If you got lost, you stopped and asked for directions, and someone actually helped you, usually with a pencil and a napkin. You trusted strangers, and somehow they didn't steer you wrong just for laughs. When the ice cream truck rolled down the street, kids didn't just smile, they sprinted, barefoot, quarters in hand, screaming for bomb pops and drumsticks. No one cared about sugar content, just that first bite, half melted, sun on your face, and sticky fingers all afternoon. Back then, high school shop class meant you actually learned something useful. Welding, woodwork, engines, the good stuff. You didn't just graduate with a diploma. You left knowing how to fix a lawnmower, build a table, and patch a hole in the roof if needed. In 1951, the first nuclear power plant went online in Idaho. It didn't light up a city, just 4 light bulbs. But it was the spark of something massive. America believed the future was atomic, and somehow that was both exciting and terrifying. Toasters, blenders, waffle irons, In the 1950s, these weren't just kitchen tools. They were shiny symbols of progress. Chrome, everything. Your appliances looked like they belonged in a spaceship. And if something broke, Dad opened it up and fixed it with a screwdriver and grit. Back then, kids didn't wear helmets when they rode bikes. No elbow pads, no foam suits. Just scabby knees and streamers on the handlebars. You crashed, you limped home, and your mom slapped on iodine like it was holy water, and somehow you survived. Television signed off at night. Around midnight, the screen would go black after the national anthem. No late-night shows, no infomercials, just static. That was your cue to hit the hay, or risk Dad waking up and yelling, "Turn that damn thing off!" In the 1950s, car keys were optional. Many pickups didn't even have a door lock. You parked, left the keys under the visor, and nobody touched it. Today, you need a password to start your microwave. Back then, trust was stronger than tech. If you got sick in the 50s, you didn't Google it. You called the family doctor, and he actually came to your house. With a black bag, a thermometer, and a look that said, "I've seen worse." And somehow, his presence made you feel better already. Penny candy actually cost a penny. Tootsie Rolls, Mary Jane's, bubble gum, all lined up behind the counter in big glass jars. You handed over 5 cents and walked out like a king. It wasn't just the sugar. It was the thrill of choice. At home, the thermostat didn't change much. You put on a sweater in winter, opened a window in summer, and complained exactly once before Dad said, "It builds character." And you believed him because you didn't want to be called soft in front of your siblings. Stick with me. In about 8 minutes, I'm going to tell you about a single invention from this era that sold 25 million units in 4 months. Parents thought it was the end of civilization. Kids couldn't get enough of it. Sunday morning radio was for gospel and news. No scrolling, no playlists, just voices on the air and the sound of bacon frying in the background. Dad read the paper, Mom made coffee, and the world felt slow, in the best possible way. In the 1950s, most milk, butter, and meat came from nearby farms. Grocery stores didn't need 20 brands of everything, just one that worked, and nobody asked if something was organic. It was. That's just how food was supposed to be. Cigarette ads were everywhere, on TV, in magazines, even at the doctor's office. Some brands even claimed to be good for digestion. It sounds crazy now, but back then, lighting up was just part of life. Even your boss smoked at his desk. Kids respected their teachers, or at least feared their rulers. Discipline wasn't up for debate. You stood when called on, said, "Yes, ma'am," and you didn't talk back unless you wanted your ears boxed and a note sent home, which you did not want. A man with a briefcase and a hat was just part of the morning scenery. He kissed his wife goodbye, caught the 8:15 train, and worked downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. And every evening he came home like clockwork, tired but proud. The Jell-O salad was in its prime. Lime Jell-O with cottage cheese, fruit suspended in midair like it defied gravity. Maybe some shredded carrots tossed in for texture. Nobody liked it, but everyone ate it, because it was polite. And, well, it was just tradition. When neighbors had a baby, Everyone showed up with a casserole and a hand-me-down crib. No baby registries, no online wish lists. Just people helping people. The new dad was expected to hand out cigars, and the new mom didn't leave the house for a week. Roller skates had metal wheels that sounded like thunder on the sidewalk. You tightened them with a skate key that hung on a string around your neck. And if your toe clip broke mid-ride, you walked home barefoot with bloody socks and a big smile. Every diner had a jukebox, either at the table or by the door. Drop in a dime, pick a number, and watch the gears whir to life. Chuck Berry, Patsy Cline, or Buddy Holly came crackling through the speakers, and suddenly the whole booth was quiet. Paperboys were real hustlers. Up at dawn, slinging heavy canvas bags over one shoulder, tossing papers with terrifying accuracy. Rain or shine, no excuses. And if you wanted to make money as a kid in the 50s, you didn't stream or sell candy bars. You delivered. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first satellite ever sent into space. It was the size of a beach ball and scared the hell out of America. Suddenly, the space race was on, and kids in the U.S. started hearing the word science a lot more at school. The average movie ticket in 1950 cost just 48 cents. For under $1, you got a seat, popcorn, and maybe a cartoon before the film. You didn't pre-book, you didn't scroll through trailers, you just showed up and picked whatever was playing, and it was usually great. In 1953, DNA's double helix structure was discovered by Watson and Crick. Most folks didn't understand what it meant at the time, but it would go on to change science, medicine, and even solve crimes decades later. Back then, it was just a strange thing in a science journal. You could buy a brand-new Ford F-100 in the early 1950s for under $1,500. No touchscreens, no Bluetooth, just steel, an AM radio, and a bench seat wide enough to fit 3 grown men and a dog. And if you broke it, you fixed it yourself. Coming up, one of the most recognized names of the entire decade, and the part of her story that almost nobody tells. But first, the Korean War began in 1950 and lasted until 1953. Over 1.7 million Americans served. It wasn't talked about as much as World War II, but it changed thousands of families forever. For many veterans, it was a brutal, cold, uphill fight, and one they rarely spoke about afterward. Most American homes didn't have air conditioning in the 1950s. You cooled off with a fan, a cold glass of lemonade, and a nap on the porch. And if it got really hot, you slept in the basement. Nobody complained. It was just part of summer. Marilyn Monroe wasn't just a movie star, she was the movie star. In 1955, she founded her own production company, rare for a woman at that time. To some, she was a blonde bombshell, but behind the scenes, she was sharp, ambitious, and didn't play by Hollywood's rules. Most homes had one bathroom, and it was usually pink, mint green, or baby blue. The toilet, the tub, even the tile, all pastel. And if you had 3 kids in one tub, bath night was a military operation. Oldest first, youngest last, same water. In 1958, the microchip was invented. At the time, no one outside a lab cared much, but it laid the groundwork for computers, phones, and just about everything we use today. Back then, people were still more amazed by the automatic garage door. American Bandstand debuted nationally in 1957, hosted by a clean-cut guy named Dick Clark. Teens danced in saddle shoes and poodle skirts, while parents frowned from the kitchen. It wasn't just a music show. It shaped what cool looked like across the whole country. If you wanted to cool off in the summer, you didn't head to a luxury gym. You went to the community pool, if your town had one. Chlorine strong enough to bleach your hair, lifeguards with zero patience, and somehow every kid still cannonballed right into the deep end. In 1958, the hula hoop hit shelves and sold 25 million units in 4 months. Kids spun plastic rings in driveways, parks, and schoolyards until they were dizzy. Neighborhood contests popped up overnight, and parents secretly tried it after dark, usually throwing out their backs with a smile. Homemade ice cream wasn't just a treat. It was an event. You poured in rock salt, cranked that heavy metal handle until your arms gave out, and prayed it set right. And when it finally did, coldest, creamiest thing you ever tasted. Nothing from a store could touch it. Rock and roll didn't just appear, it exploded. Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Elvis, they didn't sound like anything else on the radio. Parents panicked. Preachers warned against it, and teenagers, they cranked it louder. For the first time, music felt dangerous in a fun way. You didn't buy furniture from websites. In the 50s, you went to local department stores, sat on every couch, and probably got offered a cup of coffee. The guy who sold it to you lived 2 streets over. And if something broke, he'd help fix it. McDonald's had just started franchising in the 1950s. The original menu had 9 items, including a 15-cent hamburger and 10-cent fries. No apps, no delivery. You walked up to a window, paid in coins, and ate your burger on the hood of your car. And it was perfect. House calls from salesmen were common. Vacuums, encyclopedias, brushes, you name it. These guys wore suits, smiled big, and gave live demos in your living room. Sometimes Mom bought something, sometimes she didn't, but she always offered them coffee. It was just the polite thing to do. Later in this episode, we're going to talk about what the government was doing in the 1950s that most American families had absolutely no idea about. Not for years. Some of it, not for decades. In 1959, Hawaii became the 50th state. For many Americans, it felt exotic and far off. Beaches, volcanoes, hula skirts. Suddenly, postcards from paradise started showing up in mailboxes across the country. It was America's newest state, and everyone wanted to visit. Typewriters clacked away in every office, school, and home study. You messed up? You used whiteout or just started over. And there was nothing quite like the sound of someone hitting return. That loud ding and slide that meant they were in the zone. On Halloween night, kids didn't buy costumes, they made them. Old bed sheets, cardboard robots, soot on the face for a cowboy beard. You walked from house to house with a pillowcase, no parents in sight. Just kids, candy, and a night that felt like magic. In the 1950s, TVs didn't come with stands. They were the furniture. Big wooden cabinets with built-in legs and speaker cloth fronts. When it broke, Dad didn't throw it away. He called the repairman who'd show up with a toolbox and a cigarette. Men wore hats, not for fashion, because that's just what you did. Fedoras, flat caps, even pork pies. You put it on before leaving the house, tipped it when you greeted someone, and took it off indoors. It was automatic. No one questioned it. Women curled their hair with metal rollers and dried it under giant helmet dryers that looked like something from a sci-fi movie. Salons smelled like hairspray, perm solution, and gossip. It wasn't just about looks. It was a place to talk. In 1957, a little-known author named Dr. Seuss released The Cat in the Hat. It was written with only 236 different words to help kids learn to read. It didn't just become a hit. It turned story time into something fun, wild, and unforgettable. Postcards were a big deal. Every trip, even just 2 towns over, meant grabbing a postcard and sending it back home. They cost a few cents and carried a simple message. Thinking of you? People save them like souvenirs. Some still do. Bank hours were strict. If you didn't get there by 3 p.m. Friday, you were broke until Monday. No ATMs, no apps. Just a passbook, a teller behind glass, and the sound of that mechanical stamp punching your deposit into history. In 1955, Disneyland opened in California. Walt Disney himself walked the grounds on opening day. There were only 18 rides, and the park had major hiccups, including a plumber strike and melted asphalt. But still, it became the happiest place on earth. School desks had inkwells, even though most kids were already using ballpoint pens. The holes stayed anyway, like little fossils from the past. You'd poke your pencil through them during math and wonder how anyone ever wrote with an actual feather and ink. Church on Sunday wasn't a maybe. It was the anchor of the week. Families dressed up, kids sat still mostly, and after the service everyone shook hands and headed home for roast chicken. It wasn't just religion. It was routine. It held the week together. Encyclopedias were how you looked things up. A salesman would come to your door with a full set of Britannica, and your parents would pay in monthly installments. If you needed to write a school report, that big shelf of books was the Internet. In the 50s, lunchboxes were metal and built to survive a schoolyard war. Roy Rogers, Hop-Along Cassidy, or Howdy Doody on the side, and inside, a bologna sandwich, an apple, and maybe a thermos of milk. No one traded their lunch unless it had Oreos. The first credit card as we know it, Diners Club, launched in 1950. It started as a way for businessmen to pay for meals without cash. By the end of the decade, more folks were signing up and forgetting to read the fine print. We're about 5 minutes from the other side of this story. Everything you've seen so far is real, and so is what comes next. The same decade, a different angle. But first, in 1951, the first coast-to-coast live television broadcast aired. President Truman spoke from the White House, and folks across the country watched it happen at the same time. It was the start of a new kind of connection. One screen, one nation, one moment. Yard games were everything. Horseshoes, jacks, marbles, jump rope, and lawn darts. The metal kind, the ones that could skewer a foot if you weren't careful. Kids didn't need instructions. They made up the rules as they went and played till dark. Canned food was king, Spam, condensed soup, and canned fruit cocktail with one lonely cherry. Housewives stocked pantries like mini fallout shelters, quick, cheap, and shelf-stable. It wasn't gourmet, but it fed a family of 5 on one paycheck and a lot of casseroles. Bar soap was the default. Irish Spring, Lifebuoy, Dial came in cardboard boxes, smelled strong, and lasted forever. Every bathroom had a washcloth and a mystery drawer filled with half-melted pink and green soap chunks that stuck to the sink like glue. Brownie cameras became wildly popular thanks to Kodak. Anyone could afford one. Suddenly, memories weren't just kept, they were captured. Birthdays, beach trips, backyard BBQs, all in grainy black and white. If your finger wasn't in the frame, it was a great photo. Every home had ashtrays, even if not everyone smoked. Glass, ceramic, sometimes built right into the furniture. Guests lit up at the dinner table, in the car, even in the doctor's waiting room. Nobody thought twice. Smoke just came with the scenery. TV shows ended with a moral. Whether it was Lassie, the Lone Ranger, or Father Knows Best, there was always a clear lesson by the end. Be kind. Tell the truth. Don't climb into the well. Simple messages, but they stuck more than you'd think. If your parents bought something on layaway, it meant you didn't take it home yet. You made payments little by little until it was paid in full. No credit, no interest, just patience. And when you finally brought it home, it meant something. In 1951, direct dial long-distance phone calls became possible for the first time. No operator needed. Before that, if you wanted to call across the country, you had to ask a live person to connect you. With direct dial, suddenly coast to coast felt a little closer. Car interiors were metal, not plastic. If you left your Chevy in the sun, the steering wheel could fry an egg, and the seat springs left stripes on your legs. No cup holders, no airbags, just raw steel, sticky vinyl, and a whole lot of attitude. In 1952, the first barcode patent was granted. It looked like a bullseye. Nobody had scanners yet, but the idea of machines reading products, pure science fiction. Took another 20 years to catch on. But it started with a doodle and a dream in a 50s lab. Most homes had one phone number, one corded phone, and zero privacy. If it rang, you ran for it. And if your teenage daughter stayed on the line too long, everyone knew there was no voicemail. There was just hoping they called back. Sidewalk chalk wasn't bought in fancy packs. You made it with whatever white rock you could find. Driveways turned into racetracks, hopscotch grids, and masterpieces that washed away with the first summer rain. And nobody needed instructions. You just drew. Every town had a local soda fountain or lunch counter. You sat on a red stool, ordered a cherry Coke or a grilled cheese, and spun in circles while the waitress yelled your name like she'd known you for years. Because she probably had. We've talked about the 1950s most people carry with them. The soda fountain, the red stool, the waitress who knew your name because she'd known it for years. But the same decade had another side, and if you lived through it, you know exactly what we mean. In Las Vegas, Alarm clocks didn't just wake tourists for breakfast. They woke them for atomic bombs. Guests climbed hotel rooftops before dawn to watch mushroom clouds rise in the desert. Casinos leaned into it, selling atomic cocktails and hosting blast viewing parties. By today's eyes, it sounds insane, but back then, it felt like the thrill of the future. Los Angeles wore its post-war boom like a badge, but by the 1950s, the city was famous for something darker. Smog so thick, it stung the eyes. That first mystery gas in 1943 sent folks running, fearing poison. By the 50s, choking haze became part of daily life, until smog alerts warned school kids to stay inside. The interstate highway system broke ground in 1956, reshaping the country forever. But the price was steep. Whole neighborhoods, often poor or minority, were bulldozed to make way for cloverleafs and overpasses. Families watched homes vanish for concrete ribbons of progress. It brought America closer together, but for those in the path, it tore communities apart. Chrome ruled the 1950s driveway. Cars gleamed like rolling rocket ships, polished until the neighbors could see their reflections. On weekends, families dragged out buckets and sponges, scrubbing white walls and buffing hoods until they shined. A wax job wasn't just about the car. It was a ritual, a source of pride, and a way to show you were moving up. Gas in the early 1950s cost about 20 cents a gallon, around $2.25 today. A stop at the station wasn't just about fuel. Attendants rushed out in crisp uniforms, filled the tank, washed the windshield, checked the oil, even pumped up the tires. It was service with a smile, a free ritual baked into every fill-up. Step onto a 1950s New York subway car, and you wouldn't find air conditioning. Cars rattled along with ceiling fans whirring, windows flung open, hot wind blasting commuters in the face. Sweat and noise were part of the ride. Air-conditioned trains didn't come until the 1960s, making summers underground in the 50s almost unbearable by modern comfort standards. DDT fog trucks crawled through neighborhoods like parade floats. Kids chased them on bikes, riding straight through clouds of pesticide mist, laughing and waving at the driver. No masks, no warnings, just another summer thrill. Parents barely blinked. It was considered progress, the march of science keeping mosquitoes at bay. Department stores drew crowds to their Christmas windows every December. Behind glass, miniature trains puffed along tiny tracks. Lights twinkled on doll-sized houses, and Santa's elves hammered toys. Parents lifted kids onto shoulders to get a better look, crowds pressing against frosted glass. For many, those displays weren't just decoration. They were the real start of the holiday season. In the 1950s, government scientists cooked up Operation Plowshare, an idea that now sounds unthinkable. They wanted to use hydrogen bombs for peaceful construction, blasting out new harbors, carving canals, even flattening mountains for highways. On paper, it was progress. In reality, it was a nuclear fever dream. One more reminder of how casual people once were about atomic firepower. Fallout shelters were more than a newspaper illustration. Families were urged to stock basements with hand-cranked radios, dosimeters, flashlights, and canned peaches stacked high. Some built full bunkers, others simply moved food into the cellar and hoped for the best. It was a peculiar mix of Cold War fear and household preparedness. Survival plans tucked right between the laundry and the furnace. San Francisco's cable cars in the 1950s were more thrill ride than transit, with no doors, no seatbelts, and tourists hanging off the side snapping photos. It felt like something between public transit and a carnival ride. Locals clung tight during sharp turns, bells clanging through the fog. A daily adventure that would make regulators sweat today. On the roads, hand signals lingered well into the 1950s. Drivers stuck arms out windows to signal turns, pointing left, right, or waving up and down for stop. Many older cars had no blinkers at all. By the early 50s, turn signals became standard on new models. But it was common to see a mix of both for years. Pittsburgh wore its steel crown proudly, but it came with a price. The city's sky was so thick with smoke from the mills that workers' white shirts turned gray walking just a few blocks. It wasn't smog, it was soot, and it coated everything. Folks joke that you could tell a man's trade by the color of his collar. Traffic death rates in the 1950s were staggering by modern measures. Cars lacked seatbelts, airbags, and crumple zones, but roads were filling fast with eager drivers. Per mile traveled, fatalities were several times higher than today. Newspapers carried daily accident tallies. But people still piled into cars, windows down, radio playing, believing freedom was worth the risk. Las Vegas in 1950 had fewer than 25,000 residents, but slot machines were everywhere, even in grocery stores and gas stations. Housewives could drop in a nickel while picking up bread. That ended in 1955, when Nevada banned slots outside casinos. For a short time, though, gambling really was on every corner of the desert boomtown. Car theft wasn't much of a worry in the early 1950s because car keys often weren't unique. One Chevy ignition key could sometimes start another Chevy down the street. Stories spread of people accidentally driving off in the wrong car, only realizing it later. Today, it sounds impossible, but back then, it was just another quirk of the road. Families in the 50s often covered their brand-new car seats with clear plastic slipcovers. In summer, they stuck to bare legs. In winter, they squeaked against wool coats. Nobody liked sitting on them, but everyone liked keeping the upholstery like new. It was an era when protecting an investment sometimes mattered more than enjoying it. The CIA's MKUltra program began in the 1950s, a chapter that still shocks people today. Soldiers, prisoners, and even civilians were given LSD and other drugs, sometimes without their consent, all in the name of Cold War mind control experiments. It was secret, strange, and only decades later did the public begin to understand what had really happened. Detroit in the 1950s was booming, nicknamed the Arsenal of Democracy after the war. Its auto industry fueled the middle class. A factory job meant a good paycheck, a home, and money in the bank. New cars rolled off assembly lines, and so did optimism. The Motor City wasn't just thriving, it was the model for what American prosperity looked like. Cigarette ads in the 1950s didn't whisper about health. They shouted endorsements from doctors. More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette, boasted one campaign. Smoking wasn't just common, it was everywhere, in homes, offices, hospitals, and restaurants. By the mid-1950s, over half of adult men smoked. It was considered normal, even stylish, despite the clouds in every room. Doctors in the 1950s prescribed amphetamines liberally, often marketed as diet pills or energy boosters. Housewives took pep pills to keep up with daily chores, while businessmen used them to push through long hours. Addiction risks weren't yet widely discussed. To many, it seemed like modern science delivering stamina in a pill, with little thought for tomorrow. Miami's booming suburbs in the 1950s came from swamps drained and tamed. Builders laid rows of pastel homes where alligators once roamed. Canals cut across backyards, mosquitoes swarmed, and hurricanes loomed, but families bought in anyway. For middle-class Americans, a slice of Florida sunshine felt like paradise, even if the land beneath was borrowed from the Everglades. In the 1950s, many banks flatly refused to give married women a mortgage or credit card without their husband's signature. It wasn't law. It was discrimination, and it was common. Women could have jobs, bank accounts, even savings, but when it came to credit, institutions treated them as dependents. It wasn't outlawed until the Equal Credit Opportunity Act in 1974. In classrooms, prayer and Bible readings were ordinary in the 1950s. Students bowed their heads each morning, and "Under God" was added to the pledge in 1954. By 1956, "In God We Trust" became the nation's official motto. For many, it felt natural. Today, it's hard to imagine such routines without lawsuits and headlines. Mercury thermometers were the standard, and sometimes they doubled as entertainment. Shake them to bring the silver bead down. Watch it slide back up as it warmed in your mouth. Nobody thought much about the glass shattering or the toxic metal inside. If one broke, you'd chase the shiny little balls across the floor with your finger, marveling at how they rolled. It wasn't hazardous material to us. It was just fascinating. Now, the idea of letting kids handle mercury would send people into a panic. But back then, it was just another curiosity in the bathroom cabinet. Apartment buildings in the 1950s often burned their trash in basement incinerators. Each morning, superintendents shoveled refuse into roaring flames, sending smoke through chimneys into the city air. It was normal, even expected, though by today's standards it sounds reckless. To residents then, it was just another daily rhythm of city life, part of the smell of urban living. Stay with me. Before this episode is over, I'm going to tell you about something you could walk into a hardware store and buy in the 1950s. No paperwork, no background check. You handed over cash, and they handed it back across the counter with a friendly word about being careful. That's coming, but right now, lead-based paint was everywhere, in houses, schools, playgrounds. The bright, glossy colors seemed perfect for walls, furniture, and even cribs. Nobody knew, or at least nobody talked about, the health risks. The smell of fresh paint was just part of home improvement, and kids sometimes helped stir it up. Today, we scrape, seal, and test for lead dust. Back then, it was just another can at the hardware store. Asbestos was the miracle material, fireproof, insulating, and practically everywhere. Attics, walls, pipes, you name it, someone wrapped it in asbestos. The soft, fibrous stuff looked harmless, almost like fuzzy fabric. You could poke it with your finger, no gloves or mask, and think nothing of it. Contractors swore by it, homeowners bragged about it, and nobody talked about what it did to your lungs. It kept the heat in during the winter, the cool in during the summer, and nobody imagined it could harm them. Today, we treat it like a biohazard. Atomic-age gadgets turned out to be a little too atomic. Luminous wristwatches glowed green from radium paint, uranium glass glowed under black light, and that brilliant orange Fiesta-ware glaze carried radiation. Folks used them daily without worry. Nobody thought twice about eating soup from a glowing bowl. It was modern science, bright and flashy. Progress you could set on the dinner table. Doctors still made house calls in the 1950s, black bag in hand, fee tucked into an envelope at the kitchen table. Medical charts were handwritten, malpractice suits were rare, and the relationship felt personal. Families trusted the doctor's word whether it was antibiotics or rest and fluids. It was a time when medicine came to your door instead of the other way around. Across America, volunteers scanned the skies with binoculars, part of the Ground Observer Corps. Many were retirees, teachers, or even school children perched in little towers with phones at the ready. Their job was to spot and report unknown aircraft to the Air Force, a Cold War precaution that feels almost quaint today. To many, it felt patriotic, even fun. Airline cabins in the 1950s were smoky, noisy places. Passengers lit cigarettes at their seats, ashtrays clinking as trays of coffee rattled down the aisle. Turbulence sent drinks sloshing and elbows bumping, but nobody complained or pulled out a lawsuit. Flying felt glamorous, but it was rough around the edges. Loud engines, thin cushions, and a free matchbook in every seat pocket. The GI Bill sparked a housing boom, filling America with new subdivisions of near-identical tract homes. Levittown became a symbol of post-war prosperity, with veterans and their families moving into neat rows of Cape Cods. Some prefabricated homes from the late 40s still stood, too, scattered reminders of rationing days. It was a time when the dream of home ownership felt widely within reach. In the early 1950s, a family could flip through a magazine, see a pistol or rifle ad, and order it through the mail, delivered right to the front door. No federal background checks, no paperwork, just cash in an envelope. Today it sounds impossible, but at the time it was simply commerce. Firearms sold like any other household product. Families piled into one car for road trips, no seatbelts, kids stretched across laps, the dog panting happily in the back, and windows cranked open wide. Hours ticked by with license plate games and sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Somehow, it worked just fine. It was noisy, crowded, a little dangerous, but it was also the rhythm of American family vacations. Classrooms in the 1950s sometimes smelled faintly of chalk dust and tobacco smoke. Teachers read stories with a lit cigarette resting in an ashtray on the desk, occasionally tapping the ash between pages. Parents didn't complain. It was normal. The classroom felt authoritative, orderly, and familiar, even if the haze lingered long after the bell. It was a different kind of atmosphere, literally. Pressure cookers were advertised as miracle machines, promising meals in minutes. Housewives were encouraged to whip up roasts or soups faster than ever. But these early models had a reputation. Faulty seals sometimes turned supper into a small kitchen explosion. Despite the risk, they were staples of 1950s kitchens, part wonder, part worry, and another symbol of science making life easier. Girl Scouts sold cookies the old-fashioned way, lugging waxed paper boxes door to door, order sheets clipped to clipboards. Flavors were simpler then, mostly shortbreads and sandwich cookies. But the ritual mattered more than the variety. Neighbors bought a box or two, smiling at the girls in green sashes. It wasn't about marketing or online orders. It was about community. Before cable was a household word, some towns strung coaxial lines down hills for community antenna television. One tall antenna caught the broadcast signal. Then wires carried it to dozens of homes. People chipped in for the service, sharing a single signal as if it were a neighborhood well. It was a grassroots fix for families stuck in the TV dead zones. Neighbors trusted one another so much that many homes kept spare keys under doormats, flower pots, or even hanging from a nail inside the garage. It was understood that anyone who needed to borrow sugar or water, the plants could let themselves in. Burglaries were rare in most towns, and the idea of hiding keys in plain sight seemed perfectly reasonable. Jell-O molds were the centerpiece of many 1950s dinner tables. It wasn't unusual to see meats, vegetables, or even hard-boiled eggs suspended in a colorful gelatin ring. What seems odd today was once the height of culinary fashion. Guests admired the shimmer, homemakers beamed with pride, and everyone dug in with a smile. To them it was modern elegance made edible. Housewives often kept coffee tins by the stove filled with bacon grease. Nothing went to waste. That jar of fat was used to fry eggs, biscuits, or even vegetables. The aroma of bacon carried through the week, stretching a Sunday breakfast into weekday meals. It was thrift, flavor, and tradition, all saved in a tin can by the burner. In many towns, grocery stores closed at noon on Wednesdays for half-day. Shopkeepers needed a break, and customers accepted it. Families planned errands around the rhythm, knowing the aisles would go dark midweek. In today's 24/7 America, the idea feels foreign. But in the 1950s, it was normal for communities to slow down, pause, and let shopkeepers breathe. Many home garages of the 1950s had open grease pits dug into the floor. They let car owners climb down and work beneath their vehicles without lifts or ramps. Kids sometimes played dangerously close, and accidents did happen. Eventually, safety codes banned them, but at the time, they were just another part of the American garage. Practical, messy, and risky. Coal was still king in working-class towns, and many homes had basement chutes that opened to the street. Delivery men dumped coal directly into bins below, filling homes with fuel for furnaces. Soot and dust coated everything, but the system worked. To a child, the coal chute often looked like a mysterious tunnel, one more corner of the house to explore. At diners, raw eggs weren't just for the griddle. Sometimes they were cracked right into milkshakes. Called egg creams or strength drinks, they were supposed to give a boost of protein. Nobody thought much about salmonella or pasteurization. The egg was simply part of the show, cracked with flair by a soda jerk and slurped down by eager customers. Shopkeepers often turned to neighborhood kids for odd jobs, sweeping sidewalks, stacking crates, or delivering small packages. Payment was usually a nickel or a dime, maybe even a free soda. It wasn't just pocket money, it was trust. Kids learned responsibility, merchants got a helping hand, and the arrangement stitched small towns together. Today, it would raise eyebrows, but then it worked. On late-night highways, it wasn't unusual for a patrol officer to stop a weaving driver and simply wave him home. The phrase, "sleep it off," carried more weight than cuffs and a booking. It was seen as a warning, not a crime. Today, the idea feels shocking. But back then, drunk driving often went home with a handshake instead of charges. Many early 1950s cars still relied on a starter button near the floorboard. Drivers pressed it with a foot to fire up the engine. By the middle of the decade, key start ignitions took over, but for a while, the mix of both was common. It was another small step in making cars feel more futuristic and convenient. Progress in the driver's seat. Rural hardware and farm supply stores sometimes sold dynamite caps and fuses, no license required. Farmers used them to blast tree stumps or break rocks in the field. A box might sit on a shed shelf alongside tools and nails. Today it sounds shocking, but in the 1950s it was seen as just another supply. Dangerous, yes, but ordinary. Every new car rolled out of the showroom with a cigarette lighter and a full-size spare tire. They were expected as basic as the steering wheel. Over time, both disappeared. Lighters gave way to cup holders, and spare tires shrank or vanished entirely. But in the 1950s, those features were standard. Another reminder of how much priorities in cars have shifted. Many schools burned their trash on site, either in incinerators tucked in the basement or barrels set out back. Paper, lunch trays, and even broken furniture went into the flames. The smoke drifted across playgrounds, blending with chalk dust and coal soot. Nobody thought much of it. Waste pickup was less reliable, and burning seemed practical. In the early 1950s, plenty of families still rented freezer lockers at the local butcher shop. It was the only way to store meat in bulk. Families drove over with paper-wrapped cuts, unlocking their private compartment like a bank vault. By the late 50s, home freezers became common, and the practice faded. But for a time, frozen food lived at the butcher's. That's the 1950s underneath the postcard. It wasn't a simpler time. It was a different kind of complicated. That's why the window closed. The bill for all of it eventually arrived. The science that felt like progress had consequences nobody had planned for. The economics that stretched one paycheck across an entire life couldn't hold their shape forever. And the trust that made it all feel safe, the unlocked doors, the keys in the visor, the strangers with pencils and napkins, turned out to be something you have to tend to, or it quietly disappears. And most of the people living through it never stopped to ask why. They just lived it. That's what this memory box is for, to go back and actually look. If this one stayed with you, the next episode is right here. And there's a lot more where this came from. And don't forget to subscribe. It really helps me keep bringing you these back then memories. See you on the next one.